Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust in you with all my heart. Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust in you. Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust in you with all my heart. Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust. Teach me to trust in you. With all of my strength, with all of my might, the Father.
Good evening, everybody. You ever get some dessert? Make sure you get some dessert. There are people walking around with strawberries, and there's dessert and coffee on either side. But let's all stand up together, get our evening started. Do I have any guitar out there in the house? You guys hear the guitar? You guys got it a little bit? Okay, sweet. Here we go. Sing all together. All hail. All hail the power of Jesus' name. Let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Okay, now back in the day we used to do this, so we're going to do it now. Let's hear just the men. Here we go. He chosen. Chosen seed of Israel's race, he ransomed from the fall. Hail him who saves you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Hail him who saves you by his grace, and crown him Lord of all. Well done, men. Ladies. Let's all sing together. Oh, that with yonder sacred throng we at his feet may fall. We'll join the everlasting throng and crown him Lord of all. We'll join the everlasting song and crown him Lord of all. Not on, but you switch it on.
Now, that's getting better. I graduated from the University of Colorado. That explains a whole lot of why I can't get that thing to work. Colorado wrestles with whether or not we're going to have a football team every year. And I've decided that when I die, I'm going to have the CU football team be my pallbearers. That way it'll be the last time they'll let me down. That's just the way I'm thinking about it. Just thinking that way. When we opened these, I was watching. When we opened these doors at 6:45, there was a horde of people that made it over. We now know where the food is. It's on both ends, and you headed for the desserts, and you followed the missionary motto, which is, where he leads, I'll follow, and what he feeds, I'll swallow. That's just, you're right on it. So, by the way, Chris and I were sitting here thinking, what's with all the strawberries? See these young bucks running around with trays full of strawberries? And we've done that before, as I recall. I don't recall a lot, but I recall that happening before. And you know what I also remember is when those strawberries show up, so do the Douglases. Somebody's been tipping off Steve and Judy for some. You guys come up here. Come up here. There they are. And Judy is going to tell us why they keep showing up.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Steve. Happy birthday to you.
You guys maybe go to the middle where we can see, and I'll stay over here. Can you do that? And Judy, tell us, like,
So
does his
how
birthday
many
always?
remember Sages at Arrowhead Springs? There was a coffee shop called Sages, and they made the most incredible strawberry pies. And ever since, Steve has loved strawberries.
Well, actually, ever since I've loved you,
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay,
quick.
we need a little violin music right now here.
there's a little bit more to the story besides sages and everything. If you go back to when I was a kid, my mom had a garden, and she raised strawberries, and she canned strawberries. And the only thing I really didn't understand is why do they put them in glass bottles and call it canning? Now, maybe you've got an answer for that,
I have
University
no idea.
of Colorado. But I gained a taste for it, that and rhubarb, and I've had a taste for both ever since. You understand what I'm talking about.
So for some reason, I think Judy told me once that birthdays with you always have strawberries.
Yes,
Is
well,
that because
if
of
possible.
your mom
Pretty much,
or
pretty
Sages
much,
or
'cause
whatever?
he
She
likes
wants
it.
to keep calling me back to those days in Sages. You know, it's just
Remember
how
Sages?
I fell in love. You know,
It was down the hill from the hotel, and it was a pie place, and you're right. Strawberry pie was all time.
It was.
Okay, now you guys just walked in, so you don't know what we've been doing here.
I wondered.
Have you
what
And
you
we
were
don't
doing.
either.
behaving?
We was trying to figure out what to do next, and here it is.
Oh, well,
We have been sitting around tables, and we've
I
been
see that.
talking a lot about
see that.
things that we remember and things that we don't want to remember. In fact, last night we said, finish this sentence. I'll always remember, and then we, around the table, went, in a word or two, what do we remember? Like, I'll always remember certain dates in Cru. And I'll say, I'll always remember that. And then we went around the table and said, and I'll never forget, I might like to forget, but I'll never forget in like 1976.
that's what I was thinking.
Were you thinking that?
I was.
When you think, I'll always remember, what's coming to your mind that,
Where I
pops up.
was I was teaching Sunday school. It was a Sunday morning that the word got out to the rest of the world. And somebody pulled me out of the Sunday school class. Now, you don't want to be pulled out of the class saying, hey, I got something I got to
when you're
tell you.
teaching it?
Yeah, right in the middle of teaching. And I figured, I was afraid it was something involving Judy. But then I heard what had gone on. And, of course, they didn't know much right away.
And it did involve Judy, didn't it? Weren't you up on the top?
No,
Oh, you
I
weren't
was
up
not
there,
there.
Judy. By the way, 1976, for some of us who don't make the connection, is when there was a flood. Remember? The flood, and we had a
Big
number
Thompson.
of women. I thought maybe you were there.
No, I wasn't.
Way up the canyon, Loveland, at a ranch, and the river got obviously flooded, and the bridge was washed out. And we said goodbye to 6 of the most wonderful single women in the
Seven.
movement. Seven. There's a memorial to them up the canyon even now. But that
And
comes
like-
to mind as I'll
yeah.
never forget.
I'll never forget that.
I can't forget. But then, how about I really want to keep remembering what might come to your mind. Judy?
Maybe June 8th, 1975 on the lawn at Arrowhead Springs.
And why might that be?
That's when we got married.
Oh,
No, I think he was talking about CSU.
no, I don't know. So you got married Was it out where the pool?
In
and
the Arrowhead pool,
Yeah,
yeah.
the Arrowhead pool, and
Not sure what it means, but we were married on the feathers of the arrow.
Oh,
I'll let you think about that
Well,
one,
you
and
can
that'll be
fly
a joke
well.
sometime. Yeah, I know.
I think it was Paul Eshelman told me that he went to a wedding out there. I know it wasn't yours, where the groom was waiting at the front for the bride to be walked down, and he was a singer. And as she's coming down, he's singing, "I'd rather have Jesus."
Yeah.
How are we doing? I wonder when it dawned on him what he was. Do you know about that?
Well, I know. I think it's an apocryphal story,
Yeah,
but
maybe it never happened.
I could be
Oh,
wrong.
that was classic. Okay, now, because we've had a chance to sit around the table, we want you to feel like you're just sitting around the table. There's a big table here.
Yeah, I see that.
And we're around you, and I'm going to ask the audience, because here at our tables, if you think you know where Steve went to college. Raise your hand. Bob? MIT.
MIT, that's right. That's right.
And Harvard. I went to the Harvard of the Rockies. He went. And then where? Oh, let's talk about Judy. Where would you guess Judy went to college? Okay, now what was Steve's major in MIT? What kind of engineering? Electrical.
Good.
Are we
They're
right? Did we get that
smart.
right?
These guys are great.
And then Judy, how about your major at Texas?
journalism.
Journalist? It was. Here they are.
Yeah.
That was a little after college for Steve. Steve, you got to just see that picture. You got some
Yeah.
stuff running down along your ear there.
Yeah.
I don't know what
A
you.
lot
didn't
of
sh-
hair there. I don't
Yeah.
recognize that guy.
And notice, are you standing at a desk?
Yes.
I've been working.
Could that be you standing at that desk?
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
You still stand at a desk.
Oh, I do. Yeah.
How old? You're at Arrowhead, I assume. How old do you
yes.
think you are there? Judy, how old do you think he is?
Um,
Is that before you guys got married or
oh,
afterwards?
yeah, that's before we got married.
Okay.
Um,
And you
she
still
made-
did it.
So
You
that's
still
She made sure I
probably-
got my hair cut more often.
Yeah.
It was probably about in 71. Or
Okay,
two.
check the picture that's next to it.
Yeah, I see that.
Have you found her?
That's the publications team.
Are you serious? I thought you were like 14 and you're a flower child, and
Well, she was a
you're right
prodigy,
in the
yeah.
front row.
I
You
know.
got that little ponytail thing
yeah,
going.
yeah, I did. My hair was this long.
Good night, Judith.
Every so often, Steve says, "Remember how long your hair used to be?" I say, "Yeah, that's why it isn't anymore."
It's a lot of work.
She tells me it was hard to take care of. I've never had that problem, but
Yeah.
hey,
That's-
I should tell you how I met Judy. Some of you know this, but some
I'd
of
like
you
to
don't.
hear it.
I was doing my master's research project on then Campus Crusade for Christ, and I and my three roommates came out to interview some of the people. We ultimately interviewed 100 people throughout the United States. And when we got there, I'll let Judy tell her side of the story in a second, but when we got there, we divvied up who was going to interview whom, and I ended up drawing the lot for Judy, so to speak. And so when people ask me, how did you meet Judy? I say, well, I interviewed her. And they say, I've always suspected that of you is what I usually get at that point.
Just date me. Don't interview me.
Yeah, right,
Gee.
right.
No, actually, that wasn't. Here's what he actually
Here's what
wasn't.
the real
He
answer
wasn't planning to interview me. Nobody was. But I told them, look, I'm the journalist here, and I'm nosy, and I know things that are going on that other people don't know, and you really should interview me if you want to know what's happening in this ministry.
And I did, and she did.
Okay, now, if you would like to ask a question, a little dangerous, but for them. But you're sitting around their table and you've said, I've always wondered, or I've always thought maybe, I wonder if I'm right or not. I'm going to come down here and Jonathan's going to take a mic over in that direction. And you know how it is when we have Christmas conferences or something and kids come forward and talk about their day of sharing and they go on and on and on and on and on. And you know what remember what we do? We hold, first of all, I will not let you have the mic. And the other is you put your hand on their shoulder as they're talking, and as they keep going, you just squeeze it. And their voice changes, and they think, I don't want to be known as a guy with a high voice, so okay, I'm done. So if you raise your hand and I come near you, or John, and you're too long. John's back there, but let me know if you have a question for Steve or Judy. Raise your hand so we can find you. Now
See,
you don't
there are
wanna-
no questions because I write everything, and so they all know it already.
Questions like what? Okay, there's one way at the back. I'll come back. I got one here, John. You still interested? I mean, okay. Been a half an hour
Pick up
since
the
you raised
pace,
your hand.
Bob. Pick up the pace.
I hold the mic, remember? Okay.
Quick question. So, what are the two conferences that each of you remember the most for just whatever? What were most memorable for you?
You
Here,
mean
is that what you're
staff
talking-
conferences?
No, not
Any
staff
kind?
conference.
Any
Any kind.
conference.
Any kind of well, the one I remember the absolute most was the revival, 1995. Oh my goodness! Set aside the schedule. We're led through it. It was an incredible experience. I'll never forget it, and probably never be the same as a result.
For me, it would probably be Expo 72. It was in my hometown. That was kind of cool. And of course, I didn't get to do much because I was writing a newsletter every day about it. But it was an incredible experience. And I'm sure you, like we do, still meet people who say, I came to Christ at Expo 72. I committed my life to serve God at Expo 72. So, really special day.
I wonder how many of you did. If
Go-
Expo 72 had something to do with you coming to Christ or coming on staff or whatever, raise your hand. Yeah, stand up. Stand up so
Stand
we
up,
can.
yeah.
Look at this. That's a conference right there. Wow. That's cool. Got anybody over there, Jonathan?
I think so. Scott?
Nope. Don't
Steve,
give
can-
that to that boy. I know him. There you go.
He's a
Steve,
special.
can you do the MIT cheer or the mantra there?
Well, the mascot is a beaver. That ought to get you to a bad start on any cheers. No, I don't think. I mean, it wasn't like give me an M, give me an A, give me. That would have
Can you
been
do?
forever.
Can you do the Harvard cheer?
I'm sorry.
Can you do the Harvard cheer?
Well, see, I wasn't there at undergraduate school. In the business school, the cheer would be more money, more money, more money.
That's good. That's great. If you're at MIT, you're not going to games. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, we didn't
If
have a
there were
football
any.
team in those days, and probably
Yeah.
still shouldn't.
Yeah. How about over here? I need a high voice. You're not high enough.
You've got one
I
up
need-
here.
Do we have one up front? Need a woman to ask a question. On my way, if there's a woman with a question, let me know. You're not a woman, bro. Oh, you're raising your hand for her. Good. Stand up. And I'm holding this. Stand up, please. And I'll hold the chair. You can put your arm down. It's okay.
I'd just like to hear the stories of how you got saved.
Oh, okay. Well, there's two parts to it, but the second part is the more interesting part. I mean, as a kid, I made an initial decision, but then when I went away to college, I didn't go wild, but I just didn't love the Lord. But I discovered that success didn't satisfy. I'm going to talk more about this Saturday night, so I won't go too far. So when I went back to my hometown between the MIT and Harvard, I was dating a gal named Kathy. Now, you know I'm married to Judy, of course, so. But she's so glad that Kathy came into my life because if I wanted to be with Kathy on Tuesday nights, I had to go to this religious meeting, sponsored by you-know-who, okay, us. And there were a group of students from Northern Illinois that were there doing it, no staff. I mean, it's kind of one of your original catalytic works, I guess. And they would play volleyball. They weren't all that good at volleyball. They would sing. I for sure wasn't any good at singing. But I saw the joy of Jesus coming, just beaming, actually, from their faces. And long story short, seeing how I failed to really gain peace and satisfaction in my undergraduate career, I said, God, I see they have what I've been hoping for through Jesus. And that's why I made my commitment to Christ.
That was when you were in between schools?
Between.
Yeah, that's what
just
I thought.
graduated from
Yeah.
MIT.
Judy, Texas?
Actually, in Colorado.
I wonder.
I had a friend who grew up in a Christian home, which I did not, and she invited me to go one Christmas to Colorado to a Young Life camp, but I didn't know what that it was.
Tell them what your real motivation was.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
She said, you will learn to ski and there will be cute boys. And so both things were true. but there was also Jesus. And I just will never forget on New Year's Eve in 1959, the speakers talking about if you will let Jesus come into your life, he will forgive your sins. And you'll have a relationship with him. And then he said the most amazing thing, and he will show you his better way for your life. And to me, that was just astounding because my life was about getting my own way. Ask my family. And I said, Jesus has a better plan than I do? And so I almost like I signed a contract. I choose your way. And the next day I found out that didn't mean it was good forever. It was good for as long as I did it every time when it was a choice between my way. But that decision to go God's way, to choose his way over mine, stood me in decision after decision in my life to follow him and do what he wanted. It caused me to break my engagement. It caused me to come on staff. It caused me to keep seeing him when all the wise advisors in my life told him, give up on him. He's never going to get married. And so it was tremendously important, and it still is. So
I wonder how many of us had an experience at a camp somewhere. You talked about Young Life, or at a conference, but at a camp where some significant something happened in our spiritual lives at a camp. Just raise your hand. We won't stand. Look at this. Look at this. Camp, there's something about getting away and concentrated. And I remember seeing you at a Young Life camp.
yes, Bob and I knew each other when I was in high school still.
Yeah, we crossed paths at Frontier Ranch. And Frontier Ranch, Young Life had a huge part. And I was there as a junior counselor or whatever.
Yeah,
And
that's
Judy
what you
was
were
a
called.
gorgeous girl that kept coming in the pool hall. I don't know what that was about.
I
But I
did
remember
learn
you
to
in
play
there.
pool
Yeah.
at
Anyway,
Frontier
I just
Ranch.
thought this is a cool camp, but it was more than that for me too. At probably not the same camp you went to, but yes. Just hang on, I'll be right there. I don't know if I'm going to be right there.
Most of us haven't had the opportunity to just be around Bill and Vonette, and I just wondered if you could share probably one of your most maybe influential or most meaningful conversations you had with Bill and Vonette.
What a great question.
I'll take the answer first if you want. Unless
No,
you,
I'd rather I got to think what would be the best.
the name of his biography is Amazing Faith. You probably already know that. And the first real clue I had at his faith was when he came back from a Billy Graham crusade in, I think it was September of 1969. And we were working together a lot because I was actually implementing my master's research project, reporting to him on it. So he told me this earlier than he told many other people. He said, Steve, we need to have a big conference, a training conference of 100,000 people because I saw 100,000 people in Minneapolis at the Billy Graham meeting. Now, I'm an engineer, and I'm thinking, there's a difference between an evangelistic crusade drawing local people and bringing people from all over the United States to have 100,000 people for all week for training, right? I mean, does that not seem like a reasonable line of... He said, don't worry about it, Steve. God will do it. That was my first clue. Now, I'll extrapolate from that, okay? I'll never forget after many, many examples of that and finally getting the point that God used Bill to stretch us all to believe. One time he asked me to do something that was really outlandish. And you always knew when it was outlandish because he would use this phrase, face it, that's not far-fetched. I guess that's an Oklahoma phrase. I'm not sure, but all I know is he was just admitting to me that this was really far-fetched. And I went back, I forget even what the details were on it, but I went back to my office and I thought about it for a while. And then I marched back into his office and I said, Bill, you got a minute? And he said, well, yeah, sure, come on in. I said, Bill, I've come to a conclusion. I've got to have more faith than you do. And he looked at me like he was, No, I said, I'm serious. You just think of them. I got to do them.
Well, first, a Bill story. I worked for 14 years very closely with him on our magazines and helping him write books. And So one of the things we were working on were the first 5 transferable concepts, and Bill was not real good at meeting deadlines. And so we had to have all 5 of them to the printer in a week, and they were not done. So I moved into the hotel, basically, and we worked day and night on these, and I would edit something he'd written, and then he would send it back, adding back in all his flowery words, and I would edit it some more, and so we went back and forth like that until I just didn't take it back to him anymore. And but here's the thing, it was fairly stressful. Bill, for all his wonderful kindness and love, was a pretty strong pusher in making you get things done. And I don't remember ever being stressed in the whole week where I hardly slept. He was in his office, I was in my room. We worked and worked, writing, rewriting, and then I realized why. We were writing about the Spirit-filled life and how to live that way. And I went, oh, so it really does help. It makes all the difference in the world. It was great. I had lots of interactions with Vonette. As many of you would know, Vonette's very proper. And she was kind of always trying to make progress on me. And she was so gracious. She'd have me serve tea at her events, and I always spilled. And she would say, oh, it's okay, Judy. We'll just clean it up. And she just gave me so much grace. But eventually she said, maybe I should just let you be who you are. And I went, yeah, maybe so. We'll do better. So, and last thing on Vonette. The last couple of years of her life, I spent lots of time with her. And it was just the sweetest thing, and we had wonderful conversations. And she was always thinking, even in the last days when she's lying in her bed, mostly sleeping, she's saying, I just want to make sure I'm doing what God wants me to do. I don't want to waste any of my life. It was really sweet.
You guys, I wish we had more time. Wouldn't it just be fun to sit here and work on it for the whole evening? But you can't because we paid a guy to come. And we're going to get what we can from that couple, I'll tell you. No, seriously. It's just a treat, like, to have you hang with us like this.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Let us in, and
This is our group.
Yeah, we are your people.
Yeah.
Peeps, yeah.
And where you go, we will go. And hopefully not as soon as you may go. You know what I mean? Yeah. But we want to celebrate the fact that you guys take the time to lead us and do it so well, and we applaud you for that, don't we? Thank you.
Let's all stand together. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I'll worship Your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I'll worship Your holy name. You're rich in love My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing. One more time, my chains are gone. I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, early in the morning, the sun shall rise to just the voices, holy. Holy, 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 though the darkness hide thee, though the eye of sinful man thy glory may not see. Holy, thou art holy. There is none beside thee. Perfect in power, in love and purity. God in three persons.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These were left up there for you and Judy. Go ahead and be seated. I'll deliver the last two strawberries to the Douglases. You got 9 desserts there, Steve. What's that about? Oh, Jan went and got those for you. Deal. Sweet. Thanks, bro. I'll tell you what, these songs, aren't you too glad you came tonight? I mean, those songs, aren't you all glad you came tonight? That kind of music, we just seldom get to do together anywhere, in churches, anywhere we go. It's just like, yes. Certain songs just set me free. Amazing Grace is one of them. You cannot but think about it. And then this last one, Holy, Holy, Holy. Where do you remember being one time when that was being sung? Do you have memory? Let me tell you mine. I was helping or working with Promise Keepers, and we had one of our, maybe our third or fourth one outside of Boulder at what was then the RCA Dome. Chris knows where that is. In Indianapolis, there were 93,000 men, just men, in the RCA Dome, and we sang that song with just men's voices, and I mean, I could not breathe. It was a cappella like you did it with us, bro. And you just think, wait a minute here. I think we got a little taste of something. I think we're ahead of schedule here. I don't think a lot of guys could hardly breathe either. So there's something about music. There's something about stories, obviously, and there's something about this group of people getting to tell them and do them together. We're happy that Douglas has got to join us because we are your people. Dan, you talked this morning about hair. You have a lot of hair, bro. You had a lot more hair. Did Becky cut it, or when did it get shortened? Because Jen and I were looking for a long-haired dude coming in here. Seriously.
She woke up one morning and said, cut it.
Okay. I just wondered if she takes care of your hair. That was what I was sort of thinking, because I have somebody in my home that takes care of mine. I have eyebrows, and she notices those and says, Bob, your eyebrows. They're growing together. You're getting to be a unibrow. But more than that, and she said it this morning as I'm leaving the room to come to a little earlier meeting than she could come with the Allenders. She said, Bob, have you checked your nose? Do you have somebody in your home that says, check your nose? Yeah, it's usually a wife. And here's what I typically say to Jan. I've quit doing it, but I say, Jan, look, you take care of your nose, I take care of my nose. She says, no, you don't. You got a long white one coming out of your left nostril, clear over there. And I go, I don't either. I don't see that. And she says, of course, you're looking down. I'm looking up, and you better take care of your nose. I just wondered, Becky, if you're one of those hair people with Dan, because your hair's it's different, bro. Yeah. Well, Becky, you co-founded the Allender Center with your husband. You co-founded the Andrew Allender Dumpster Food Company with your son. And you facilitate ICAP, International Christian Alliance on Prostitution. We got a sense of what you do from what Dan said today. I hope somehow we get to know more about that. I know it's written somewhere, but maybe tonight. You love all the right things. You love motorcycles. You love sailing. You love fly rods. Oh, question on the fly rods. When he had to put his hand on all the things in the garage, did any of those fly rods get to stay? Oh, perfect. You love all the right things, Becky. That's awesome. You love clean garages. I've been taking notes on things Dan's saying. You love shopping lists for resident nuisances. And you love Dan. And you love things hidden in plain sight. And I have your book. And when we get done here, I'm going to tell you something that's going to make all of you women very, very happy. But we're going to be very, very happy when you come up here, Becky. Would you do that? And can we say hello to you? Becky Allender.
Thank you, Bob.
Your mic works.
My mic works. Is this it? Do I say goodbye to you here?
Yeah, you're right.
All right. Where's Chris? Thank you. That music is amazing. There's nothing like singing with Cru people. There's just nothing like it in the whole wide world. It's been such a blessing. And Judy and Steve, thank you so much for your faithfulness, for hearing God when you did, for using your lives for the kingdom. It's wonderful to meet you and to know that who's at the helm here with this amazing, amazing group of people. It's just an honor to be here in every way. When I was a freshman in college, there was a woman in the center said, hey, Campus Crusade is a great thing. Her name was Becky. She said, would you like to come? I'm like, I grew up in the church. I've gone to Billy Graham crusades, and I don't think so. And I transferred my junior year to another school, and the same thing happened at the student union. A girl named Becky sat down with me and said, hey, Campus Crusade meets on this day. Would you like to come? And again, I said, oh, no, but I'm so glad you're on campus. And then it was the beginning of my senior year. I transferred back to Ohio State. And this time, I found out where Campus Crusade was meeting. I was a townie at that point, and it was the Crusade people who nurtured me in faith and a Holy Spirit understanding of who Jesus was. And I went on a fall retreat, and I went on the Christmas conference in Ohio someplace. I don't remember where. Lots of buses took us someplace. It was 1973, and Bill Counts was speaking. Does anyone here remember Bill Counts? Whoa. Well, come tell me what he's doing, because he rocked my world. He changed my life. He spoke words of great value of the importance of the marriage covenant relationship. And, I was a new creature in Christ, thankfully, to Campus Crusade. So I have great amazement that I'm standing here. And also we had an opportunity to be speakers with Family Life Team for 5 years. And that was an incredible, incredible privilege. And we would have done that longer, except starting a school with the hope and dream of training counselors and seminarians to love Jesus and to do the really hard work and get into the depths of people's hearts was a lot harder than we ever could have imagined. So for our family, we stepped away from that. So again, to be back here is just incredible. And it is odd to follow Dan. Dan's been speaking on stages and speaking to people before I even knew him. And he's a complicated man. He's difficult, and he's hilarious. And often he takes up more space in the room than most anyone else. So it's odd to follow Dan. And also because I've been really happy not being up front on the stage. I was happy that he was earning the living by speaking, because certainly our family would have been destitute if it was me. So I was fine to do everything else at home, and yes, clean the garage for 42 years. I could do that. I believed in Dan's message. I could feel the Holy Spirit change people's lives with the calling that Dan had to sexually abused people. I was really behind his message and was happy to be a stay-at-home mom. I was hidden in plain sight, and I thought I was content, and I sort of was. There are many of you women and men out here that love being up front. You love being bold. You're passionate. God has called you to be a speaker. But that was not me. So I'm not here to say that one is better than the other, but I'm here to say a lot of times there's a reason why. There are some people that are more happy to be up front and some people that hang back. So as Dan has been talking about your legacy, your inheritance that you will give to your friends or your families, it's important to take time to know your story. And so some of what I'm going to do tonight is to just explain a little bit about my family and how I've come to be someone that's usually not up here, and to have compassion for that and not feel deplete because I haven't been that person up front. What I want you to consider is what it means to give your story away. And I'll say this a few more times. That's my main message. It's not about my story. I'm hoping that some of the things I say can get you thinking about the importance of wondering and remembering about your story. Let me tell you how I came to write a book entitled Hidden in Plain Sight, and far more, how the process has changed my life. Dan talked about at Cru and Dennis and Barbara, I'm not sure where you are, but how you had that conversation, like you probably won't be over this empty life in a year. And then maybe 5 years, but I'm kind of thinking it's all the years from all the way to heaven now. But within that 13 months of our beginning of our empty nest, my father died, my mother died, our firstborn child, Annie, got married, and Amanda, who had been at Seattle Pacific University, our middle child, transferred to a school in Baltimore, and then our son went to school at Seattle University. And as Dan said, even our dog of 14 years died. And I found myself more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. And during this time of grieving, I noticed how everyone seemed to get Dan, but me. I was so lonely, and I wondered how do I get his attention? So we had a difficult time. We had this sabbatical to go on for 9 months, which you don't get granted very often. And my father had died, and my mother was suffering with dementia. My brother and the sister lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I've always been the away daughter. And so there was a poll of, Dan, maybe we should go to Columbus for a while, and I could help out. Obviously, he didn't want to do that. But my mother's best friend came to me, and she had taken care of her husband who had had Alzheimer's. And she had said, Becky, go for this. Be with your husband. Enjoy this time. You don't know what the future holds. And so with her blessing, we went off. And we returned a couple of times to make sure she was okay. But 3 times we packed our bags wondering, I think this is it. We better go home. And each time my brother and my sister said, no, stay. It's okay. When we finally made it home, it was pretty near Mother's Day, and I had already planned that I was going to fly to Columbus and be with my mother on Mother's Day and stay for 2 weeks with her. I couldn't remember the last Mother's Day we had been together. So I was all set for that, and before I was to fly on Thursday, I got a phone call from my sister 4 a.m. saying that she and her husband had found my mother dead on the kitchen floor, apparently of a heart attack. And as any sudden death comes, it's hard to comprehend. So we flew on, the kids and I flew on Thursday. Dan was doing a seminar, and we buried my mother Saturday morning. And then Dan was able to arrive Saturday afternoon, and we had her memorial service. And so the next day is Mother's Day. And we spent the entire day with Dan's mother, who lives in the same town. And we took her out to eat. We went to a park. We had the whole day with her mother. And then that next morning, we all got on the plane to fly to Baltimore because our daughter was graduating from Johns Hopkins University. So we met her professors and her friends and celebrated with her parents, the friends of her parents, and packed her up. And her college career was over, and my career of being an orphan was just beginning. Dan and the kids flew back to Seattle, and Dan's mother and I flew back to Columbus. And Jesus is so close to the brokenhearted, and he was very, very close to me then. When Jo, Dan's mother, and I ended up in Columbus, her boyfriend picked us up and then took me to my parents' home of 52 years. And I, oddly enough, waved goodbye after I found the hidden key. I knew where it would be in the garage, and I got inside the door. And once I closed the door, my knees buckled, and I slid down to the floor and thought, what now? My brother and his wife had a trip planned to China to be with her parents. So they were gone. My sister and her husband had plans to go to Canada and be with his family. So they were gone. My best childhood friend, Judy, had a planned trip to Florida. So she was gone. And my best friend, Jane, had to leave for her summer house at Lake Erie. I could hear my dad's words saying, there is never a convenient time for death. I'm going to grab some water here. So I wasn't sure what to do. Should I clean out the refrigerator? Certainly, I needed to do that. Or should I start gathering things for Goodwill? Because I wasn't going to go home for 10 more days, and I was the out-of-towner that needed to help with getting the house ready for sale. Of 52 years they had lived there. But for some reason, I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom. I opened the windows, and I could smell the privet hedge that took me back to childhood. And then I walked into my parents' bedroom and looked at the bed where the kids and I would go home a lot while Dan was traveling. And at the evenings, I would get in between my mom and dad on the bed, and we'd watch Johnny Carson or just talk. And so I looked at that, and I looked at the rocking chair where my brother and sister and I had been rocked, and then all the grandchildren had been rocked in it too. I thought, I'm going to sit and rock in the rocking chair. And then I decided, I'm going to open my mom's closet door. And I opened her closet, and in plain sight was a 5-year diary I had never seen before. I stayed up all night and read it not once, but twice. I even got out graph paper trying to figure out the 5 years in the events of when my parents met on a blind date in college, Texas, and when the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened, and when my dad enlisted in the Navy and was then stationed in the Mediterranean. And then all the jobs my mom had during the wartime. She was a pretty high-end secretary. And so she was in Texas and Ohio and California and different Air Force, working with Air Force men. What would that be? Colonels, wherever, officers. But in her diary, she wrote more things than I really wanted to know. I tried to figure out who was she dating and when was this relationship with my dad. And even with the graph, what I was realizing is her heart had seemed sealed off to me because she was a very austere, cold, strong woman. But as I read her brokenness and her life, my heart began to open up to her. And I found myself more tender to my mother than I ever had. In her brokenness, I began to love her more. My mother was austere, a perfectionist. She was critical. She was self-righteous. She knew everything about everything and everything about everyone. She was a no-nonsense mother, wife, and friend. But this diary allowed another side to be seen that I had never known. As a child, it was safer for me to play in closets because my mother had so much to do. She was busy, she was angry, she was sewing clothes, she was sewing curtains, she was fixing meals for people in the church, she was sewing costumes for the nativity scene for the church. She had so much to do. And as a young child, I would accompany her while my sister was in school to many club meetings. And they would be meetings of how we need to build a new wing on the art museum. Or we need to raise more money for Buckeye Boys Ranch because there's more orphans that need to come. Or she would chair the national chapter of PEO, which is an organization that raises money for women's education, girls. I mean, she always had things to do. And I would go to these meetings, and as a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old, I was just in the backyard of whosever house this meeting was at. Who does that? Who does that? There was a cost for our family with all the things that she needed to do. One summer, I remember waiting for my mother to pick my sister and myself up from the swimming lessons. And we were on the grass, and there is lots of bees in the clover. And I'm like, it's probably not safe to be sitting here. So I saw some monkey bars, and I think I'll go on the monkey bars. But while I was going on the monkey bars, I didn't have the strength to make it across. And I don't know, did I hang there a minute? Did I hang there 3 minutes? Finally, 2 mothers noticed, and they came and actually, pried my fingers off of the monkey bars. I have no idea how long I hung. I was a very self-sufficient, tenacious, strong little girl that learned never to ask for help. Never. The cost was too high. Which, if anyone out there is self-sufficient and sees clearly, it's a setup for loneliness. After raising 3 children, I would sometimes think of those monkey bars, and I would think, my children, if they were 4, they would cry out for help. What happened that I learned not to scream at such a young age? My mother's idol was her grandmother. Her grandmother was a rancher's wife in Texas. And she would get up every morning at 4:30 in the morning and put the sweet potatoes in the oven, and I guess she probably had to light the oven with wood, I don't know. And she would cook meals for the ranch hands, and she would not go down to bed until all of her 6 children were in bed. And this was the one woman that every now and then would attune herself to my mother. So my mother's role model of being a really good mom was to work. My mother's mother was more flighty. She was the pianist. She was the organist at the church. She saw angels. She talked about demons, and she never seemed to get the dinner on the table. So my mom was really more a mother to her mother. And that's not really a good thing for a child, to never be able to be a child, because you've got to be the adult. Her grandmother could offer love to her, but that wasn't very often. My mother perfected the same ideal for herself, except for when she sat down to smoke a cigarette. I now know my mother was a trauma-stricken woman who, other than a few visits to the ranch where her grandparents lived, did not have the attunement or care that she needed. Her father died when she was 13 of melanoma, and she remembers standing behind a door with her dad, and she said his back was like ground hamburger. He couldn't wear a shirt. But the last thing he was able to hear really was my grandmother was interviewed to become the first woman social worker in the county of Throckmorton, Texas. So therefore, he could die knowing that they would be provided for. But it was up to my mother to be in charge of the house while she was working. And of course, this was during the Great Depression. And she had two younger brothers, and it was hard to keep the two younger brothers in line. And so they were placed in an orphanage. And my cousins and other people have said she always felt guilty, that it was her fault that her brothers were in the orphanage, because they would beg to come home. And she'd always say, well, maybe I could have done it better. You know, maybe I could have kept us together. Trauma begets trauma. And the Great Depression is when my parents were children, and scarcity harms. And let's be clear, outside of the Garden of Eden, the human experience encompasses trauma. My father was the life and love in our home. Hearing his Volkswagen come in front of our house and then get ready to turn down the alley, I would run out of the door and run down the alley, because he would slow down a little bit so I could hop on the running board. And he'd race home, and I'd feel my hair fling back, and I'd hold on. And it was such joy. He could light up any room. He would take my friends sailing, and he'd allow us to go on the low side of the sailboat. So we would be leaning over, and he'd let us put our heads all the way into the water. We'd arch our backs. It'd feel like the water was going to take your head off. It was so fast and so fun. And then he would rescue my mom when I had slumber parties and take us all down to the Scioto River that was frozen, and we'd go ice skating. And his smile was just the greatest. And we would be crazy sometimes. We'd dress up and put on Rodgers and Hammerstein albums and dance in the living room, just like sing and dance. And you can imagine the bind that put me in with my mother. But also, he was the life of the party unless he was in a depression. And my mother would say to my sister and brother and I, that family has highs and lows. They're high as can be, or they're as low as can be, and you better not be that way. Do you see how my family shaped me? Do you see how every family sets the scene for a child to learn how to relate and how to gain a style of relating? I knew how to stand up to bullies on the playground because I had been bullied at home. I had a keen eye for injustice. And I was humiliated throughout my life with my mother's unkindness to hotel workers, restaurant workers, clerks. I was mortified of not her not being kind. Seldom do we get to see the great plan in the moment, but one of the benefits of aging is we come to see the blueprint of his plan. Jesus invites us to a life of redemption. One event occurred when a friend who was beginning a ministry to women asked me if I would help her. So I said, sure. So the next time we were going to meet, I brought my checkbook. And I said, what's the name of your ministry? Because I want to write a check. She said, I don't want you to write a check. You don't? No. I want you to write an article every month for my organization called Red Tent Living. Well, I immediately knew it'd be so much easier to write a check. She had no idea that my years at Ohio State, I would just go crazy over an English paper. And it was my roommate, Jane, who would talk me off the ledge. Because you see, I had so much inside of my heart, and I had so much to say, but I demanded perfection from myself. I had learned to be really kind to other people, but I hadn't learned how to be kind to myself. I think of another story once with my mother where she said to me as a very young child, I can't pick you up after dance lessons, wait in the lobby. I didn't know what a lobby was. I already knew I was stupid. And I think there was an adult, like a receptionist, or maybe, there was someone I could have said, what's a lobby? But I didn't want her to know I was stupid, too. So I just left the studio and went walking around the shopping center. Like, I don't know, maybe I thought I'd finally figure out what a lobby was. I couldn't read then. But you see, as kind as I was to other people, I was really brutal to myself. So, but I said yes, I would write once a month. And I think I knew that was Jesus. I felt the Spirit say, do this. So I wrote my first article. Dan and I prayed before I pressed send for this internet, which that was 2013, knew about. He said, your life will never be the same. I didn't know what he thought. I didn't know what he thought. I didn't know what I thought, but I'm like, okay. But what he said was really true, but it took me a while. Well, that first article, I think I got 30 responses. There's a place to write a response. And it was shocking. All of a sudden, I was no longer hidden. Dr. Pennebaker is known as the father of writing therapy. He's a social psychologist at the University of Texas in Austin. And in 1997, I don't know what class this was, but he did an experiment. He said, half of the students, I want you to write 20 minutes a day about a traumatic event, something that's really important to you, or something that was sad. They didn't even have to read it out loud. They knew that no one was even going to read it. To the other group, he said, write for 20 minutes every day in class. They had to do this in class. And don't write about anything that's really too sad or really I don't care what you write about, just kind of write. Well, the group that had written for the semester for 20 minutes a day about a traumatic event, that group had less trips to the health center. And that group that had written about something meaningful or something in their past that was traumatic, that group, their grades improved. So we had that control group. And so it turns out that actually a lot was happening for the students. And actually when I began writing, a lot was happening for me too. And little did I realize that how much it would really change me. Writing helps slow us down. I think our culture especially is going so fast. And just for an instance of how much faster it's going, in 2013, we were to write 1,200 words for a monthly blog. Now it's less than 700. And probably it will go down to about 400. That's how quick it's going. So writing slows you down. Writing what was dear to me allowed me to love my parents more. And I think I always loved them. I knew all those stories of the Great Depression. I mean, I felt guilty for having two parents. They each only had one. But I think the other thing was I was finding compassion for me. And my love for Jesus grew. I felt his presence more. In writing about things that were important, I could see that he had been there, that I had never been alone. We are created with mirror neurons, they are called. You've probably heard of the experiment where they bring a newborn baby that's maybe an hour old so the parents can have some rest and put them in the nursery with other babies. And they've done experiments that with just being hours old, that the babies, if they hear a baby at that end of the room, they actually turn as much as they can, all bundled up. They have mirror neurons. We are created with mirror neurons as humans, as how we are able to be empathetic to people. And animals have these too. And I believe, given God, our creator, that every created thing has these mirror neurons. And if you've ever read the book, The Hidden Life of Trees, has anyone ever heard of that book? There's one page in that book, maybe two, where there's these trees in Africa. I'm not sure which country, but lots of giraffes start coming and eating all of the leaves. I mean, really endangering this grove of trees. And what the trees do through their roots, they communicated farther down the savanna, or not the savanna, the plains, to the trees in a way that the trees far away then secreted sticky, smelly stuff on all of their leaves. So by the time the giraffes made it down to them, the giraffes weren't about to eat those leaves. Is that not stunning? Is that not stunning? We have an amazing creator. Writing allowed me to attune myself to that young girl in the monkey bars. Writing allowed me to attune myself to playing in closets. And again, with these mirror neurons, I think Jesus is so amazing that while I was writing, I have had the opportunity to babysit my grandchildren at these different ages where I was recalling incidents that I hadn't really thought about. But that's the point of slowing down. And it was almost like as I watched my children or their spouses parent a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, that I was kind of coming along quietly in those stages, I was being reparented. It's amazing, the healing work of Jesus Christ, and when we cooperate with what he wants us to be kind to ourselves for. Our pastor a couple of weeks ago said, you know, if you're having to forgive yourself and you love Jesus, you can't do that because he's already paid the price. He has already paid the price. You can't out-forgive Jesus. And so I just think my greatest message is there's so much kindness that we all need to give to ourselves, especially at this age when we have time to slow down and remember. And as you think, and again, my greatest desire is for you to write your stories to your children, your grandchildren, your friends, your nieces, nephews, anyone who loves you, to write those stories that opens a doorway if they don't know Jesus, but even if they know, to have a greater wherewithal to how to live this life. I'm going to just read a page and a half of this book, if I can get to the right page. I have the opportunity, one family lives near us, so I have that amazing opportunity to have one grandchild, maybe 3 hours at a time in my own house, which is stunning. And so at this point, I had Elsa, and she was allowed to have 20 minutes of screen time a day. And I think actually I wanted to watch Mary Poppins. It was probably a little too old for her. But we had watched a little bit each day, and we were at the part where Bert and Michael and Jane and Mary Poppins are just ready to be animated, you know, and get on the merry-go-round. And I noticed the clock, and I had to say, we're going to have to stop, you know, we'll read this later. And she's just hollers, I'm not finished yet, I'm not finished yet. And had a tantrum, and as I've learned, the Montessori way is to not talk her out of a tantrum, and she cried, and then she got up and went to a rocking chair to self-soothe herself. And there was something about that sentence, I am not finished. I began thinking of all the moments in my life when I could have said, I am not finished. One experience immediately sprang to mind. The summer after I finished my sophomore year in college, I begged my parents to allow me to transfer out of state. I was desperate to flee my boyfriend, who suffered from bipolar disorder, before most people understood what that meant. He was either charming or abusive. I had lived through 3 turbulent years of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And looking back, I see how I was bonded to him the way a prostituted woman is bonded to her pimp. Twice I broke up with him, and twice he tried to kill himself. Twice he ended up in psychiatric hospitals. Twice I caved under the weight of holding his life in my hands. Twice I returned to him to save his life. But this time I had to get away. My parents granted my transfer request, and I started afresh in a new school with a new major and all new friends. I immersed myself in anthropology courses, and I did really well. I was free. I was alive. I was happy. I applied and was chosen to participate in an archaeological dig in the mountains of western Colorado during summer semester. I was honored to be among 15 students from all over the country who would do site surveying for Indian relics and remains before oil companies began mining for shale. We worked on remote bluffs and along clear rushing riverbeds in the most beautiful terrain I had ever seen. Herds of wild horses would come galloping by, and eagles soared above us in the sky every day. As a Midwestern girl, I felt as though I was in heaven. On the last night of the dig, while I was sleeping in a tent with 2 other girls, my advisor, my professor, entered and quietly climbed on top of me on my cot. He started kissing me while pulling down his pants. I could smell the liquor on his breath. I froze. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move as he forcibly raped me. I didn't want to embarrass him in front of the other girls. What he was doing horrified me, but at the same time I felt so ashamed at what was happening to me. I hoped my tent mates had slept through it. Afterward, I lay still, barely breathing. I can still hear the sound of his dirty hiking boots scraping the hardened dirt floor of the tent as he climbed through the triangle canvas door flap, never saying a word. The next morning, I showed up for scheduled kitchen duty with my advisor. As I prepared the oatmeal on the camp stove and set the tables, I avoided any eye contact with him. I wondered how I would be able to make it through the next 5 minutes. After breakfast, we loaded the jeeps, and I rode away from camp as if nothing had happened. Each of us flew home to different parts of the country, returning to our respective lives. But I was a dead girl walking. I couldn't return to the university in the anthropology classes I had come to love. I couldn't even tell my roommate what had happened. I telephoned her from Ohio and asked her to send me all my belongings on a Greyhound bus, leaving her to find another roommate for the house we had rented. Then I changed my major. It took me 15 years to call what happened in that tent that it was actually rape. The abuse happened on this campus. I was at Allison Hall. Bob had no idea that this was the campus. I had no idea when I said yes that this would be anything that I would even be talking about. I just knew I wanted to come. Isn't Jesus amazing that he has allowed me to come back, regain this ground, not as a victim, but a redeemed woman with a voice, power to stand in authority, and to stomp on the neck of evil and say, hell no, you did not win. You did not win. Satan meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. There is nothing that Jesus' crimson blood shed for us does not cover. I hope I have made my central point clear. I want you to give your life away to those you love. I want it to be a guide, to be hopeful. I am giving a fierce inheritance to my children that the surprising work of God brings me to this campus, not merely as a former victim, but as someone who stands and says, thank you, Jesus. You are my all in all. And thank you to all of you, because this is what your life message is all about, what you get to do. So I hope that this is the inheritance that you will come to give to your loved ones for His glory. Thank you.
Wow. Becky, Becky, Becky. 3 Beckys tonight. One of them we will always remember. We will always be glad for the first 2 because they planted seeds that perhaps grew. And apparently one of them was here. Isn't this amazing? Jen, you were in Allison Hall, weren't you? Yeah. Well, giving your story away gives us hope that the stories that we start writing as you two guide us through this, because some have said to me afterwards, Dan, this morning, I hope he tells us how to do this. And I think you're probably headed there. You told us what it looks like when you tell it and how deeply it matters that you tell it and that you write it and all. And so it's a treat that we have this pair of people who help us take steps forward that otherwise we might not do it. So thank you so much, Rebecca. That was awesome. Appreciate it. We thank you. And before we leave and appreciate a little time that we might want to take for interaction and talking and having some more strawberries. By the way, you polished all the other desserts. They're gone. And Jan has several of them right there in front of Steve. So, but there are more strawberries on both ends. But women, you need to know this, that we're going to give you hidden in plain sight. And the Allenders have brought those, and they're in the lobby. And we invite you as women in this room to take one as you leave. But you're not done yet being with Becky, because tomorrow at lunchtime, you all women get to be together. And my guess is you have questions, and you want to ask them, and and that's what tomorrow's lunch is about: food and talk, and that works well for the women. With the guys, food's all we need. We'll be with Dan, but nobody wants to say anything, so we'll just enjoy the brats and the fries and the beans and all that, or whatever. Anyway. Hasn't this been a sweet evening? And the Allenders, again, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.